Hey, sorry that took me a few extra minutes. Just had a couple things to do to get ready. And I guess it's been a few weeks. It's almost been a month. That was my longest break away from streaming. So let's see as people start to roll in. So we hopefully will have a guest a little bit later who will be talking about some interesting things that have come up in the past couple of weeks in the various online discussions that I've had and all these debates and all this sort of thing. And in the meantime, I wanted to talk today about one of the experiences that I have had as a proponent of the sorts of views that I take in metaethics, specifically with respect to moral realism. And this is the charge of conceptual impoverishment. So, one thing that I will often say about moral realism is that every account of moral realism is unintelligible. If you don't like the term unintelligible, you could go with meaningful or something like that. And so you could call that Lance's trilemma if you want. You could call it the anti-realist trilemma, the realist trilemma. I don't know. We could work on coming up with a good name for the particular trilemma. But very roughly, what it comes down to is the fact that there are many different ways of characterizing moral realism. Now, when I say many different ways, I don't mean like the number of different types of insects. So it's not like there's a million ways of characterizing it. There are very roughly two broad categories, the naturalist and non-naturalist accounts of moral realism. And then there's a bunch of positions that are a bit hard to square with the standard realism, anti-realism distinction. So you have stuff like constructivism, divine command theory, ideal observer theory, maybe some types of relativism. There are various sorts of accounts that are hard to square with that dichotomy. And so that dichotomy, you could say it doesn't carve the philosophical landscape at its joints. It's a bit of an awkward fit. And don't blame me for that. I didn't come up with these categories and distinctions. And in fact, there's even some people that dispute how to categorize realism itself. And these characterizations, one of the major characterizations is whether moral realism is best construed as the position that there are moral facts, or whether it's best construed as the position that there are objective or stance independent moral facts. And then there's even problems with the terminology itself. Some people prefer or use certain types of terminology rather than other types of terminology. People used to use mind independent rather than stance independent. Some people, I think, got humor, uses observer independent. Someone can correct me on that if I'm wrong about that. But you have a variety of different types, different sorts of characterizations of the different realist positions, and that itself can complicate matters. But when it comes to the position that I take, I guess roughly speaking, it's hard to say that there are these like particular rules. The issue generally is that when there's a umbrella term that refers to a class of positions, if there is substantial variation in the content of those positions, then one's objections to one of those positions isn't necessarily going to apply to one's objections to some other set of positions. And so if you say you're an anti-realist, you are positioning yourself as a critic or a disbeliever or a skeptic or someone who rejects a broad range of positions. And that means that your reasons for rejecting one of them won't necessarily be the same as your reasons for rejecting another one. So naturalist accounts, there are different types of naturalist accounts. Some of them will, what they all generally try to do is to locate the moral facts in the realm of natural facts and the natural world. And some of them would just see this as an analytic matter, that just as a matter pretty much as by definition, moral facts are a certain type of natural fact, but they don't have to construe it that way. It could be that there are various sorts of procedures that we have to engage in to discover which facts are the moral facts, and that's not reducible merely to a matter of, for instance, conceptual analysis or analyzing how we use terminology. So there's different construals of naturalist accounts of realism, but generally speaking, these accounts struggle to capture a certain sorts of characteristics of morality that non-naturalist realists, by comparison, have an easier time accounting for, at least because they don't commit themselves to certain sorts of views that sort of make it unclear how they can manage to get these characteristics in there. And these characteristics are a bit hard to construe, but it comes down to something like the you could say the normative force or the authority of the moral facts in question. So for instance, if you have a very basic naturalist account, that account might hold, hey, moral facts are really just facts about what increases or decreases cooperation. It's morally good if it increases cooperation. It's morally bad if it decreases cooperation. You should do what increases cooperation, morally speaking, and you shouldn't do what decreases cooperation, morally speaking. And so the moral facts are construed in terms of the role that they play in facilitating pro-social interaction between people, by getting people to facilitate positive engagement with one another, by minimizing conflict. And that could include violence, stealing, harming one another, exploiting one another. So on that sort of account, okay, so you have moral facts, and these moral facts are identified with a certain type of descriptive fact. So it is morally good means something like it increases cooperation. Now, the problem is that it's hard to see what happens to the normativity when you identify these normative facts with these certain sorts of facts that sure look like descriptive facts. And you could say that there's certain sorts of normative properties that accompany these facts, but it becomes difficult to see on a naturalistic framework, which isn't to say necessarily that it's impossible, how you can account for how, like, okay, let's say that the moral facts are facts. There are facts about what increases or decreases cooperation. Well, when I, as an agent, am going about trying to make my decisions, I know what increases or decreases cooperation. But maybe I don't care about that. Maybe a person just doesn't care about what promotes cooperation, or they do care, but they also care about other things, and cooperation doesn't always come out on top. And so they may or may not care about the moral facts in virtue of the fact that they're moral facts. They might just not be part of their motivational profile. So the naturalist accounts, often the issue for me is in that false, trivial, and unintelligible trilemma. They come out to look to me to be trivial. And what that amounts to, in part, is that they constitute facts that I'm already disposed to think that there are, or they add nothing to my picture of the world that strikes me as motivationally or practically substantive. So I look out at the world. I already think that there's facts about what increases or decreases cooperation. And you come along and you tell me, okay, well, those facts are the moral facts. Okay, well, if you're telling me something about how certain linguistic communities use language, if you're telling me about, hey, there's this procedure, there's these various philosophical methods that we could use to reason through our sort of initial starting point with certain sorts of intuitions and so on and so forth, where we would come to recognize that a sort of refinement of ordinary people's disposition to think, judge, and speak in certain ways settles on morality as cooperation being the best sort of refinement of that folk conception, something like that. Okay, well, again, I might just not care about that, or at least not find that to be like what is going to guide my own actions in life. Yeah, sure, okay, I understand that there are facts about cooperation, but I may or may not prioritize those at the expense of some other set of considerations. And telling me that those are moral facts doesn't change that for me. I am no more concerned with, I like, among other things, I don't care about doing something because it is a moral fact. I have certain goals and values. I act in accordance with those. If the moral facts align with those, great. If they don't, then I don't care about them. So the naturalist accounts don't seem to say anything that would resonate with me in practical terms. It's like, hey, this stuff that you already think exists, we're going to put a label on it. That's how it strikes me. Now, some naturalist accounts might try to get more out of it and say that there's more to say. Fair enough. And then you could engage with that. But by and large, they strike me as fairly trivial in that, in a certain sense, an anti-realist could just say, yeah, okay, there are facts of that kind. So what? I mean, it almost seems like an argument by labeling. It seems like a merely verbal sort of characteristic. Now, characterization. Now, they might say that there are certain sorts of metaphysical characteristics or certain sorts of properties that they're arguing for. And so it's not merely verbal, but again, it's going to face this problem of practical inertness. Like, I just don't care about it. Now, of course, you could say, well, just because you don't care about something doesn't mean that it's false. I agree. That's why I say that all the accounts are trivial, false, or unintelligible. So if the account is true but trivial, okay, true. It's true that, if moral facts are facts about cooperation, then there's moral facts. I mean, would that do much for you if you found out, hey, we have opted, or it turns out that the moral facts, the moral facts are facts about what's cooperation, or what promotes cooperation. There's facts out there that about what increases, decreases cooperation. And by the way, those are moral facts. Does that get you really pumped up? to care more about cooperation, it doesn't change anything for me at all. I wouldn't care. So that's one issue. Then you might have accounts that they'll say things like, moral facts are God's commands. Well, if God doesn't exist, then that would be false. And so they're false in a rather mundane sense. It's just not true. So in this case, the moral claims or one's metaethical account would entail that first order moral propositional claims carry with them implicit commitments that are false. And so you get just false. So it'd be some kind of error theoretic perspective on certain sorts of accounts. Now, note that this is not error theory proper, because error theory is a more substantive and robust account, which holds that ordinary moral claims are propositional. They attempt to describe objective features of the world, and they fail to do so. And so they are systematically false. Moral language systematically fails to, report truth claims. And so these claims are all systematically false. So that incorporates more semantic theses and some other components to it. And I'm not doing that. I'm saying conditional on this being your account of morality, then those, and to the extent that people use language that way, those claims would be false. So it's not straightforward error theory. So you have trivial and false, and then finally unintelligible. And when you claim that certain characterizations of moral realism are unintelligible or meaningless, you can get into some trouble. And the main trouble is that a lot of people very much do not like this sort of characterization, because it's generally granted, it's taken for granted that the positions articulated by realists are not unintelligible. Now, divine command theory and naturalism, naturalist realist accounts, do not strike me as unintelligible. Hey, the moral facts are facts about what promotes cooperation. There are facts like that. So there are moral facts. That's makes sense to me. Now, I might have further questions. What does it mean to say that they're moral? Is that a merely verbal label that you're sticking onto the terms, or is there more to it than that? So that would be one concern. But there are these other accounts, these non-naturalist realist accounts. So non-naturalist accounts maintain, not surprisingly, that moral facts are not reducible to certain types of natural facts. They are not natural facts. They are facts, but they're not reducible to something that would be amenable to empirical inquiry, or that could be understood in the sort of conventional scientific and naturalistic terms. They fall outside the scope of that. Now, that might give the impression that these accounts you might think, oh, okay, so it's going to be some sort of like supernatural account, like it's about what God says. That's no. So it turns out, most philosophers, at least analytic philosophers that responded to the 2020 Phil paper survey, actually, they're not all analytic philosophers, but there was a survey in 2020, the Phil paper survey. It was sent out to a lot of philosophers. They're mostly analytic philosophers. Some of them are continental or come from other philosophical traditions. Analytic philosophy is a sort of a recently emerged area of Western philosophy that is largely predominant in the Anglophone world. So, mostly the United States and the UK, and Canada, and basically Australia. So it's a sort of outgrowth of a philosophical tradition that is largely rooted in Western philosophy. And most of that philosophy is written, discussed, and taught in English and within particular cultures. And so it has this it's like a very specific branch of philosophy that dominates the academic world, but it's a contingent fact that it happens to do that. It could have been that some other philosophical tradition like continental philosophy took over, or maybe, I don't know, pragmatists got super popular, and that sort of swept a lot of the sort of current trends in analytic philosophy out in a way that changed the dynamic of the whole landscape. Or it could be that certain approaches within Western philosophy dominated to the exclusion of others. So, a lot of the historical developments in philosophy strike me as highly contingent and path dependent. And it's like, okay, well, we ended up where we are because of certain people and ideas happened to spread and get popular, whereas, make a few changes and some other set of views could have been, the dominant ones within the field. Anyway, so there's a survey done, and in that survey, you'll find that 62% of the philosophers that responded to that survey endorsed moral realism. A little bit more than half of that 62% in a second question seemed to have endorsed naturalist accounts of realism. And then about, I think it was 26.6% overall endorse non-naturalist realism. So where was I going with all of that? I had a point I wanted to make about that. I'm trying to remember what it was. I'm just spouting out numbers at you. I'm trying to remember what point I wanted to make. Well, so I should say it's 26.6%, I believe, are non-naturalist realists and 26.1% are anti-realists. So if you look at non-naturalists and anti-realists, they're about comparable in the overall proportion. That difference is marginal. It's like 2-3 people or something. So it's not a huge difference in those survey results. I'm still trying to remember why I brought up the number of realists. Oh, right. So most of the philosophers that responded to that survey, I think it was like 70% or so, are atheists. And yet you still have a majority that are realists. And if you look at the overlap, it is, if you're a realist, if you're a theist, it's very likely that you're a moral realist. But even if you're an atheist, it's still very likely that you're a moral realist. It's not an uncommon position for atheists to take. So it's not just that theists tend to endorse the non-naturalist views. Non-naturalist views are popular among secular moral philosophers and of secular analytic philosophers more generally. So this is not in any sort of direct way, theological or theistic position to take. I guess I've never really said that, but that is important to stress that that secular realist accounts are quite common. You do get this thing in the apologetics back and forth between Christians and atheists, where Christians will say, they're fond of the moral arguments. A lot of apologists will use that. Very roughly, it would be something like, if God doesn't exist, then objective moral values don't exist. Objective moral values do exist. And so then you argue that God exists because, you couldn't have objective morality without God. And we do have it. So, you got to have God. Let me look up the exact formulation from William Lane Craig so I can post that here. Yep. Okay. It's pretty close. Yeah. So it's a pretty straightforward argument. So Christian apologists will use that. And there's a kind of weird response that you'll get from a lot of atheists, including anti-realists, where they'll reject the first premise. They focus on rejecting that first premise and saying, no, you could have objective morality without God. And I don't like that move because, you might think it's like the tougher position to reject moral realism directly. But often what's really strange about these accounts is they'll say, well, there are accounts of realism that don't appeal to the existence of God. So clearly you could have objective morality without God. That actually doesn't follow. It's possible all of those accounts fail, that none of them work, and that it's actually not true that you can have objective morality without God. But that doesn't mean that if you do have God, like if you are a theist, boom, you can have objective morality. It could just be that you can't have objective morality either way. And so then it would technically be true that without God, you can't have objective morality because you can't have objective morality. So you might say, for instance, if God doesn't exist, then square circles don't exist. It doesn't follow that if God exists, square circles do or could exist. They don't exist either way. And it's the same thing with this. So it's very strange when people critiquing the moral argument will say, oh, but there's all these accounts that atheists give of objective morality. So what? Maybe all the accounts suck. I don't think most of these accounts are very convincing at all. So, it doesn't necessarily follow. So is it possible to argue that moral realism could be true if God doesn't exist? Sure. But that doesn't entail that you are off the hook and are therefore entitled to reject the first premise of the argument. That doesn't follow. Yeah, sure, you can give an argument. It doesn't mean that it can be true. It's going to depend on a bunch of background factors. So, unless we're talking about, I don't know, what epistemic possibility, like maybe there's some lame form of possibility that you could make that argument on. So unintelligibility is this third part of the trilemma. You have false and trivial, but this third part, it's a bit, one of the things that I also find strange about people raising objections to this is that they'll want a sort of robust account of meaningfulness. They'll want a robust account of unintelligibility. And it's interesting because, I can give what I would take to be very roughly a sort of sketch of an account I would find acceptable, but I don't think that you would have to endorse like my conception of meaningfulness in order to regard these terms as highly dubious and of questionable meaningful content on a variety of conceptions of meaningfulness that you may or may not endorse or be disposed towards. So, I mean, first, why would I have to endorse a specific conception? But second, it seems like a sort of a asymmetric demand for rigor, because look at the dynamic of the situation. So typically what happens with non-naturalist realists is that they will argue that moral facts give us reasons, or they are irreducibly normative. So they'll employ certain sorts of terms or concepts. So let's focus, for instance, on a concept that Derek Parfit employs, which is the idea of an external reason. So the idea behind this is that certain sorts of facts give you reasons to perform certain sorts of actions, and the reasons that they give you to perform those actions are not reducible to your desires. So, for instance, we might say that the fact that some future event would cause you immense suffering gives you a reason to, not engage in that action. So the fact that it would cause you suffering, that gives you reason. There are some simple examples, maybe touching a hot stove, something like that. The fact that touching a stove would hurt you gives you a reason to not touch the hot stove. Now, on my view, I would look at the situation of touching a hot stove and say, well, touching a hot stove for like a normal human body tends to hurt. Maybe if you're an android or a lava being from another dimension, it's not going to hurt you. So there are going to be contingent factors about your physical constitution that are relevant to whether it actually causes pain. But assuming it causes pain, like an action that causes pain, I don't know, like you could say it gives you, like, the fact that touching the thing would hurt you gives you a reason, and that reason isn't reducible to your desires. Personally, I think that is complete nonsense. I think it doesn't make any sense. I don't know what that could possibly mean in principle, and I'll get to why I take that to be an issue, because it's not just I don't get it, therefore it's not meaningful. There's more to it than that. And unfortunately, a lot of people have interpreted my position to be some sort of crude appeal to incredulity. Like if I don't understand it, then it's not, then it can't be understood, which is very much, not something that I think at all. I don't understand most things. And I've given numerous examples to illustrate this point. I don't understand how cars work. So, if I take my car to a mechanic and they get it fixed up and they tell me what's wrong with it, I needed an oil change. I roughly understand, there's oil. After a while, oil gets old or something. I don't know. And then you have to, change it. Or fuel. I understand fuel. You use the fuel, it goes away. You need more fuel. So there's like really rudimentary things that I have some vague sense of. But if they start talking about car components, I'm going to have no idea what they're talking about. And they could probably literally sprinkle in like straight up Star Trek sci-fi nonsense jargon, and I wouldn't know the difference. Maybe if they start talking about quantum oscillators, I'm going to get suspicious, because I'm pretty sure I don't have quantum components in my car. But by and large, I'm not going to understand what they're talking about. I don't go, oh, well, car mechanics it's not meaningful because I don't understand them. That would be ridiculous. I don't understand most stuff in theoretical physics or, advanced math. I'm not going to understand it. Or other languages, I'm not going to understand them. Doesn't mean I think it's not meaningful. But anyway, I'll get to that. What's interesting about these scenarios is that the proponents of these concepts do not and cannot explain them, and they're very explicit about this. So I've done this before, but I will do it again. And this time I have a new quote, and I'll see if I can pull. I always lose my quotes when I start looking for them. So I have the Parfit one, which I'll find in a moment. Normally I have it saved on the page. Okay. Well, I know what the page is. It's page 272. Remember the exact page that it's on. But I'm going to look for the other one where it's a remark from Scanlon. Whatever. I'll just give you the Parfit one. It's good enough. No, I'll give you the Scanlon one too, if I could find it. Let's see. Yep. Okay. I think I have it, but I will also share the Parfit remark. All right. So here is what Parfit says. This is On What Matters, volume 2, page 272. So Parfit says, when Williams argues that there are no such reasons, his main claim is that externalists cannot explain what it could mean to say that we have some external reason. I admit that when I say that we have some reason or that we should or ought to act in a certain way, what I mean cannot be helpfully explained in other terms. I'm going to go over that again. Parfit says, when I say that we have some reason or that we should or ought to act in a certain way, what I mean cannot be helpfully explained in other terms. I could say that when some fact gives us a reason to act in some way, this fact counts in favor of this act. But this claim adds little, since counts in favor of means roughly gives a reason for. Williams suggests that the phrase has a reason does not have any such intelligible, irreducibly normative external sense. When he discusses statements about such external reasons, Williams calls these statements mysterious and obscure and suggests that they mean nothing. Several other writers make similar claims. Now, he has a follow-up remark after that, which is also interesting. But no, Parfit just straight up says, can't give an explanation, can't be helpfully described in other terms. And what you'll often see when you ask people to explain what these external reasons are is that they will give you this sort of terminological merry-go-round where you'll say, what is an external reason? And they'll say, well, something that counts in favor. What does counts in favor? Well, it means you should do it. What it should do, what does it mean to say you should do it? Well, it means that you have a reason to do it. And so, well, what is a reason? It's something that counts in favor. And so you just go in a loop. Now, my suspicion is that this is a sort of it's like a vestigial organ linguistically. So, you would think that the terms that we use, if they are to be meaningful, would be embedded in and interconnected with the rest of our terms and concepts in some way that can bottom out in percepts or some sort of actionable, something you could do with those concepts. They make a difference. If you looked at the world and one proposition was true rather than another, in principle, you could observe some difference in the world. If the distinction between something's truth and its falsehood, or its truth and some contrary thing being true, isn't in principle something that could make any sort of practical difference, it's not clear to me what it could mean. And for me, then, you could say that my own conception of the meaningfulness of terms bottoms out in some sort of pragmatic conception of meaningfulness. But never mind the pragmatic conception of meaningfulness. Ask yourself whether, if someone said, hey, I have a florp, and you say, okay, what's a florp? And they say, well, it's a thing that flirps. And you say, what is flirping? Oh, well, that's what a florp does. Okay, and a florp is a thing that flirps. Now, note that the terms are sort of mutually interdefining, but they don't connect with reality in some way. Now, if you said, look, I'm going to need more to understand the concept, I'll tell you a little bit more. A florp is something that flirps, and to flirp is to flarp. All flirping is a form of flarping. And then if you say, well, what's flarping? And you say it's a broader category that includes flirping. You can see that you're not getting anywhere with this characterization. There's nothing, you can't look out at the world and see a florp. You don't know what would count as an instance of flirping. You don't know what it would mean for it to be within the category of flarping. You have all of these problems with what the heck is even being said. You have language. Now, you have language that looks like it's asserting something meaningful, because I can use similar grammatic constructions with someone that's never seen a dog before and say, hey, dogs exist. There are dogs. And someone goes, well, it's a dog. Oh, it's a thing that barks. What's barking? Well, it's something that a dog does. And if someone goes, okay, well, what is barking? I need help understanding the concept. Oh, it's a sound that an animal can make. And then now you got stuff to work with. Okay, well, maybe the person knows what an animal is. Oh, so this is a type of animal. Oh, yes, it's a type of animal, and it makes a sound. Okay, well, what does a bark sound like? Can you make one for me? Try to emulate the sound, and then you could have a recording of a dog barking, or you could show them a dog. Ultimately, all that dog discourse, dogs, barking, animal, those concepts, you could at some point in that chain, if not the concept itself, maybe you can't point to a dog. I can't point to a living dinosaur. They're extinct. I mean, unless you want to count birds, like a T-Rex, right? I can't point to a T-Rex, but I could show you T-Rex bones. I could show you a reconstruction of what a T-Rex looked like. And so ultimately, the descriptions that we have our employment of these concepts if not directly something we could point to. I could point to a dog. I could point to a tree. they can synchronize with and connect, and they fit into a web of concepts that do bottom out and things that we could point to in the world, that do make a difference in the world, that you could observe, that could make a difference to your life and your actions and your decisions and your observations and your predictions and all of that. But what you see with a flirping, and flirping is a type of flirping, is that it never connects with any of that. You don't have any conceptual entry point to begin to connect that set of terms to the rest of your terms. So, sometimes people will criticize this view by saying, all words are defined in terms of other words. This is how all words work. This is a ridiculous complaint. But I'm not asking for a verbal definition and then being told, okay, well, verbal definitions, either it's going to be this big coherent web where you define this term instead of that term and that term instead of this term. And then if you demand, no, I don't want you to tell me that A is a type of B. What is an A itself? You might just say, yeah, I can't give a further verbal definition of certain sorts of words. They can't, you could have these you could say they're primitive or atomic concepts. They can't be broken down further into other concepts. They can't be described in further terms. Maybe there are concepts like that. Maybe there aren't, but let's just grant that there are. Okay, I'm not asking for someone to break the concepts down further. I'm asking them to work with me communicatively to demonstrate the concept, to show or to explain or to in some way cause me to acquire the concepts in question by whatever work would be necessary to do that. So I'm not asking them what concepts is the concept of an external reason composed of. I'm asking them, what does it mean? How convey the meaning to me? Now, it turns out that the meaning of these terms appears not to be communicable. They can't explain what they mean by these terms. And so one of the things that really concerns me about their characterization of these terms is that why did they put you through the merry-go-round in the first place? Well, imagine if you did, just imagine for the sake of argument, you were using terms that didn't mean anything, right? And you didn't want that to be exposed. So you go around saying there's florps, 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 florps. Now, if someone says, what's a florp? And you know that you cannot explain, you could just say, oh, they're not explicable. I can't communicate what a florp is. There's no way. One thing you could do is say a florp is something that flirps. Now, some people might be satisfied with that. They go, oh, okay. And they'll go away because it's impolite to go, well, hold up. What is flirping, right? So part of these are what you could call decoy definitions. They are when someone says, what's an external reason? You say it's something that counts in favor. And then someone says, what does that mean? What a person has done is they have fulfilled their social and intellectual obligation to offer you an explanation. Now, never mind the fact that the explanation is completely empty, vacuous, circular, mutually interdefining, and useless. It achieves nothing that an explanation should achieve. It's complete horseshit as an explanation. They have fulfilled their social and intellectual responsibilities. You ask what X is, they said it's a Y. And so if you now say, oh, okay, but what's a Y? Now they are socially justified in scoffing at being dismissive. Look, I already told you an X is a Y. What more do you want from me? Well, I want to know what the fuck a Y is, okay? So why don't you tell me what that is? And if they go, well, a Y is a Z. Oh, it's a Z. Okay, and a Z is, oh, come on. What, explanations have to stop somewhere. You're not satisfied with it's a Z? Look, if I told you a florp is a florp, a florp is something that flirps, and flirping is a type of flirping. Do you have any clue what a florp is? No. So if you got to that third point, so here's the conversation. Hey, Lance, what's a florp? Oh, it's a thing that flirps. Okay, I don't know what flirping is. What is flirping? Oh, it's a type of flirping. Any idea what a florp is now? No. And so it would be totally appropriate for you to say, okay, that's not helpful. I still don't know what a florp is. Now, what I could do at that point is say, look, you've asked me 2 questions. You asked me what a florp is. I told you it's a florp. Then you are impertinent enough to ask me what flirping is. And I told you it's a type of flirping. So what are you going to do? Just keep asking me questions? Why, like a stupid child? You're just going to keep asking me questions. You just don't know anything. We understand what a florp is. And so if you don't get it, maybe you're conceptually impoverished, because we all get it. People will make comparisons to jazz. Like if you have to ask, you'll never really know. You won't get it. And so there's these claims that philosophers make that they cannot communicate what they mean. they openly admit that they can't communicate what they mean. They just can't tell you. Yeah, they'll engage in this weird flarping thing. What are they doing? Why tell me that a reason is something that counts in favor if counting in favor just means it's a reason? That's like, if I ask what a dog is, it's canine. Okay, what's a canine? It's a dog. What is the point of that? I think, okay, I don't know exactly the motivations of people that are giving these explanations. There could be a completely legitimate motivation for doing this. It could be that the person asking the questions, certain terms they haven't heard before, certain things that they're not familiar with, the ways of framing things. Like if I said, oh yeah, moral realism is the claim that there's stance-independent moral facts. Now, let's say you read some books from the 90s on meta-ethics, and you're familiar with the term objective, but you don't know this newer term, stance-independent. And so you say, well, what does that mean? You say, oh, it means that there's objective facts. So I'm like, oh, okay, now I got it. Cool. We're on the same page. It's that there are objective moral facts. There's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with saying, look, you don't understand an external reason. Well, it's something that counts in favor. And so if you understand counting in favor, there's more to it than that. So it's something that counts in favor and isn't reducible to your desires or your goals or values or anything like that. So now, if you didn't understand one term, maybe you'll understand this other one. Now, and I think a lot of people do that. They're hoping that if you don't understand one set of terms, you'll understand another set of terms. The problem is that if you don't understand any of the sets of terms, in my experience, I've been treated like there's something wrong with me for not understanding what they mean, even though, Parfit, Scanlon, and others will say that they can't explain what they mean. Now, I think that there's something suspicious going on here. I think that there's something suspicious about a meta-ethical position that relies in a very foundational way on an appeal to the use of certain terms. And those terms purport to refer to or capture certain sorts of concepts. But the people using those terms to refer to those concepts cannot explain what those terms mean. They can't furnish you with the content of the concept itself. They cannot communicate what the concept is. And when pressed, they'll say, yeah, I can't helpfully describe this in any other terms. It's an incommunicable concept. It's, so, okay, maybe there's concepts like that. But I almost never see anybody within analytic philosophy saying, hold up, here we have an instance of it. Williams did do this. And so you do have philosophers. So, first, here is a case study. There's at least one philosopher, a very prominent philosopher, who interacted directly with this material and said, yeah, I think this is, note the word, unintelligible. This seems like nonsense to Williams. And so there's at least one case of a professional philosopher having this reaction. And so if it's okay for Williams to have that sort of reaction, why is it so bizarre if I do? That's one issue, is that philosophers do have this reaction sometimes. And note that remark at the end of that paragraph. Several other writers make similar claims. And so there is this reaction to these concepts that non-naturalist realists like Parfit employ is out there in the academic ether. It's present. And yet you don't see it presented as an actual substantive position in the literature, at least in terms of standard sort of textbook and intro characterizations. What you will see, and this goes so far as that some professional moral philosophers that do meta-ethics, like Mike Humer, will say, you've got three options as an anti-realist. You've got error theory, you've got expressivism or non-cognitivism, and you've got relativism. And you could roll constructivism probably into the relativist accounts. I would prefer to use the term stance-dependent accounts. So that would exclude some types of relativism and then include some types of relation-designating accounts, like constructivism, ideal observer theory, and you could say anti-realist divine command theory. I think that would be a better term for capturing a range of views where they're dependent on stances. And so that would be one type of anti-realist position. Then another would be, there are no moral facts. Moral claims don't even express propositions in the first place. That's where you get your classical non-cognitivism. You are going to get some hybrid accounts and more recent work. And then you're going to have your error theories. So, but there's actually nothing. Those are the standard characterizations. So, like, Humer is careful to cash out what he means by relativism, error theory, and I think he used the term expressivism and not non-cognitivism. There was a sort of pivot over to expressivism at some point in the last few decades. In any case, so those are the three, and I think Humer says those are the only three possible positions, and yet I don't endorse any of them, and I'm an anti-realist. So what am I supposed to do? So you do have that problem where philosophers have characterized the issue in this way, but anti-realism, keep in mind, is not, the traditional anti-realist accounts are all defined in terms of their semantic theses, their theses about the meaning of moral claims. Non-cognitivism holds moral claims are not propositional. Error theory holds that they are propositional. They do purport to describe objective moral facts, but they fail to do so. And then relativism holds that moral claims are true or false in some relativistic way. And the same, you could cash out the semantics for like constructivist and ideal observer accounts and that sort of thing too. And they're going to cash it out in some way that where there are moral facts, it's cognitivist position, and they're stance dependent. But I don't think that the rejection of realist positions is contingent on endorsing a view of the nature of moral claims such that they share a uniform and determinate semantics to them. And so I don't accept any of those accounts because I think that we have reason to reject the semantic theses that are built into these sort of traditional three accounts. So that means that, I have different reasons for rejecting different anti-realist accounts. And so I couldn't endorse a single, like, here's why anti-realism is correct. Anti-realism is a reactive position. It reacts to different types of positions. And because those different positions have different contents, you can't react to all of them in the same way. The reasons for rejecting naturalist accounts of realism are different from the reasons for rejecting non-naturalist accounts of realism. And my position isn't predicated on some account of ordinary moral semantics. It's not about how ordinary people use language. So, and there's a lot more to say about that. I have said a lot, like my primary work is actually on, you could say, folk metaethics, or how non-philosophers think about these issues. I'll just say very briefly, if you're interested and you haven't heard this stuff before, I endorse folk metaethical indeterminacy. I think that ordinary people don't have views and don't have implicit commitments to any particular metaethical account. And that includes, it's not just realism, it's also anti-realism. I do not think most people are anti-realists. I don't think most people are realists. I think people are none of the above. And I think that's the best account given the empirical literature. As far as I know, I haven't heard anybody else endorse this. There was a paper that was very formative and important for me from Michael Gill from 2009 that proposed metaethical variability and indeterminacy as possible explanations for the intractability of 20th century metaethics. And I was heavily inspired by that. And Gill sort of proposes both. And I think there's merit in both theses. There's been more development on this, and there are other similar accounts. So there's Don Loeb's moral incoherentism, which is definitely worth a mention. And Ross Colebrook has argued that basically that people are irrational because they have sort of conflicting and mutually inconsistent metaethical positions. Let me check on whether I have a guest. So it looks like my guest might not be available today. Give me one moment. Oh, right. Yeah. So I might be streaming again tomorrow. So we might, I take a few weeks off and then I might do two of them back to back. I think my guest, I don't know if I'm being mysterious, if it should be a surprise. Uh, so it's probably going to be tomorrow. So we will see. I will check. So anyway, they got me way out in the weeds. Right. So I've been talking about unintelligibility. Now, let me pop into the comments. I see two or three people have said a few things. It looks like it's been a pretty slow day. I was getting 20 people, 15, 20 people before, at peak. And now I've just had about 5 or 6. So it looks like coming back, people aren't seeing me. I don't know if that, taking a couple weeks off kind of messed up YouTube showing that I'm on here, but let's see. And it looks like a couple names I don't recognize. So let's see. And I didn't let people know that I'm here on Discord. So let me go do that. Second. All right. I don't like dead air when I'm just typing or doing something and not talking. So I that's been a lot of setup. But basically my point with all of that is that the proponents of the non-naturalist realist positions are employing terms and concepts that appear to be incommunicable. They can't explain what these terms and concepts mean. They seem to figure prominently, they're essential to the positions that these realists are defending. And almost nobody seems to be pushing back and questioning and challenging this. It seems to be just be granted. Yeah, the terms are meaningful, but even though we can't explain what they mean. And some of the philosophers will just say, we don't have to and we don't need to. We don't need to explain what they mean. And so that could raise a further question. Wait, hold up. How do you know that these terms are meaningful if you don't know how to explain what they mean? How did you acquire the concepts? How do you communicate the concepts? How do you, and if two people are both using the concept, how do you know it's the same concept if you don't know how to communicate with it, what it means? How do you know you're using the same concept? It seems to be, look, maybe there's answers to these questions, but it doesn't look like people, like the proponents of these views, seem all that interested in engaging with or defending them, these claims. And I don't see in the literature a whole lot of people challenging them. And I think that that's strange. So there's been this asymmetric demand that I do all this work to try to give an account of meaningfulness, or that I give this account or that account. I have to do all this work to show how the claims in question are unintelligible, but they don't have to show that they're meaningful. They don't have to explain what they mean by the terms. There seems to be a very strange asymmetry and lack of challenge to the very terms themselves. So, imagine you have this two people, and a person shows up and they say, I found a mysterious creature in the woods. What did you find? Oh, I can't tell you, but it's mysterious and it's been undiscovered by science, And another person goes, I don't really believe you. Can you give me a description of the creature? No, I can't, but trust me. And then if you say, okay, I don't trust you, like, why should I trust you? Well, my friend saw it. Look, here's my friend. My friend saw it. Hey, Alex, come over here. Alex, you saw it, right? And then Alex is like, oh, yeah, I saw it too. Oh, totally mysterious, totally undiscovered by science. It doesn't fit in any of the animal kingdoms or anything. You can't explain it. There's no way. And then if you ask again, oh, well, could you give a description of it? No, I can't. But we saw it. We know what it looks like. It totally looks like something, but I can't tell you. But we're experts. We spent 10 years out in the woods looking, and we saw it a lot of times. We saw it like 1,000 times. It's totally there. We're certain that it's there. We're super confident. It's so confident. But we can't tell you what it looks like. We can't give a description. How would you react to that? Because I would think that they were joking, and then if I was convinced they were sincere, I would be concerned. Like I would think, oh, like there have been something intellectually has gone wrong with the line of reasoning that they're employing. And yet philosophers have no qualms about using mysterious terms that they can't explain. Now, again, maybe that's legitimate, but where's the account of, hey, some terms are mysterious and inexplicable. That's okay. And we have a means of finding out which ones they are. And we've determined that these ones are legitimately mysterious and inexplicable concepts and not just confused nonsense. What standards and criteria do they use to determine that? Who knows? Like I think the answer is absolutely none whatsoever. It's just, it seems right, feels right, intuition. There's not anything to this. So I look at cases and the concept seems like it applies to the case. There's nothing deep here. This is just people using terms and not being able to explain them. And I think it's classic empty verbalism of analytic philosophy. So, oh, cool. There's a few questions here. So let's pop these up. Pedro says, how you doing, Lance? I'm doing okay. So I took a few weeks off. I started a new job. I have been a little busy, but I've also been, if I'm being honest, kind of burned out. I've been doing this for 8-9 months, and I was at 699 subscribers. So let's see if I hit 700 since I started streaming, or maybe it could have been earlier in the day. Let's see. Watch, it's going to be like 697. Like some people unsubscribed. Let's see. No, it's still $6.99. If you're not subscribed and you subscribe now, you will be person number 700. So do it. There's only like 5 of you here. So, oh, now I see 8. Still $6.99. Oh, well. Okay. So, yeah, doing okay. And yeah, I took some time off. I've been a bit burned out. I've had a few interesting exchanges and debates and discussions on meta ethics and other topics. And I think, and I haven't gone into this much, but I'd like to start incorporating more of my psychological research into these discussions. And so you're going to be seeing more of that. I know I made all this big talk of having a bunch of guests. I've had a few guests. I had Josh Nobe. I had Sacris on the channel. I have a video that I recorded that I haven't uploaded yet. So I do have another one on the way. I might be dialing it back for a little bit just to sort of get into the groove of the fall semester, get some work done. I have papers I want to get published. I have things I need to get to be doing. And so I might dial it back for a little bit, maybe a month or two. And then I might go back into full swing. But I'm back for now for the streams, and there'll be some more content coming out. All right. I got a hey, Lance from Mon de Green. Hi. So Pedro says, new, I am not, but it's probably the first time I write in the chat. Oh, cool. Okay. All right. We have a question from someone, I can't read your name. Have there been attempts to provide a psychological account of the causes of belief in these concepts? Perhaps a psychological account can show the belief may not be truth tracking. It depends on which concept you're talking about. So when it comes to the psychology of metaethics, most of the research, there's been some research on whether people believe that whether belief in moral facts is necessarily motivating. So that's on the internalism and externalism about motivation debate. I don't really do that research. There's a few people that do that. It's pretty cool stuff. I just don't do it. My focus has been on the research on whether or not non-philosophers, that's my preferred term for describing the typical participants in these studies. It's people without significant formal training in academic philosophy. That's typically how I operationalize that distinction. Of course, it's a continuum. What if you've been in a philosophy class for a couple of weeks? What if you've been in one whole class, but you didn't get a lot out of it? What if you've taken 2 classes? So it's not like a person, there's like a magical moment where you acquire the essence of a philosopher and like little sparkles float off of you. And now you're a philosopher, but before that you weren't. So it's really more gradual than that. So you have to operationalize it for practical purposes and make rougher distinctions that doesn't really carve reality at its joints, but it's good enough to make estimates, general estimates. So I prefer the term non-philosopher. Some people use folk, some people use ordinary people. So there's a variety of options you could use for how to characterize the distinction between philosophers and non-philosophers. Most of the research on non-philosophers has looked at whether they are moral realists or not. And then if they are realists or anti-realists, whether they're naturalists or non-naturalists, or whether they endorse error theory or relativism or expressivism or whatever. So that's what that research it typically looks at. I haven't seen any research directly looking at concepts like external reasons or irreducible normativity. I don't know that non-philosophers, I think it would be really hard to operationalize that in a way where people would have much of a chance of interpreting it the way that researchers intend. These are technical concepts. They are technical concepts that are built on top of a academic apparatus that is itself composed of yet more concepts. And so it'd be a bit like asking someone that's never heard of a cell whether they think there are mitochondria. Like it's a technical term. And so you need to introduce and explain it to them. And there's a whole bunch of problems which I've discussed before with that. Problem is, if you start introducing terms and concepts to people, you might be prompting them to think in ways that they didn't think before you asked the question. And if your goal is to figure out how the person thinks about the issue without training in philosophy, and the only way to get them to understand the questions is to train them in philosophy. And in particular, to think of philosophy in terms of the distinctions and categories of like a distinctive, Western conception of analytic philosophy. In particular, you are potentially heavily biasing people in favor of thinking in particular sorts of ways. I call the possibility of people developing a philosophical perspective while participating in a study spontaneous theorizing. I call prompting participants to become philosophers in order to study how they would think as non-philosophers philosophical induction. I also call it wildly misguided because, it'd be like, hey, we want to know how people that have never, imagine you want to know how people that have never been to Kansas think about something. So you run the study in Kansas and you bring all the participants who, you screen them online. Have you been to Kansas or not? Yes or no? And you only take people that say, no, I've never been there. You bring them all to Kansas and then you run the study. Well, you brought them to Kansas, so now they have been to Kansas. So you've negated the whole purpose of the study. The participants are not from the participant pool that you were intending to recruit. Same thing if you're trying to recruit people without training in philosophy and then you train them in philosophy, then you're no longer studying people without training in philosophy. I call that a philosophical induction. And those are two concepts, spontaneous theorizing and philosophical induction, that I talk about in my dissertation and critique research that tries to train people to understand the relevant metaethical concepts. Anyway, most conceptions of realism, irreducible normativity or external reasons or the counting in favor relation or any of that sort of stuff, as far as I'm aware. If you know of it, please let me know, because I would be super thrilled to find that kind of research out there. I would have thought someone would tip me off and let me know about it, but as far as I know, no one's researched that. All right. Is it Jonas or Jonas? I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Also, if I've asked before and you told me, I'm really sorry too. It's been a few weeks. It's not a good excuse, but I may have forgotten. Anyway, Jonas Chinson says, do you think that realists are just confused by the fact that moral statements contain an is, like murder is bad? Are you anywhere close to an opinion with any certainty on why non-naturalist realists claim to perceive moral facts? So they wouldn't necessarily all claim to perceive moral facts. And so you're going to have at least three categories with respect to the sort of the access conditions, you could say, like the epistemic access we have to these stance-independent moral facts for non-naturalists. Some might endorse full-blown moral perception accounts. And there are accounts like that, where there is some non-metaphorical sense in which one perceives moral facts. Then you're going to have some people saying that you can see the moral facts, or you can see that something's wrong, and they're just using the language metaphorically, and they may or may not lean too much into that metaphor, and it's sometimes it's unclear how literally they're taking it. And then there's going to be people that are like, yeah, no, you don't see the moral facts, you don't perceive moral facts, you understand them, but it's not, you don't see them. So you're going to have people that are like, you don't, you do, and question mark. It's not clear where they fall, somewhere in the middle. Do I think that they're confused about is? Whoops. I don't think so, but I do think that there's something to that. So generally speaking, I'm going to have a somewhat Wittgensteinian set of concerns about how and why philosophers fall into what I take to be the conceptual and linguistic traps that they fall into. And part of it is going to be prompted by the roots of the language that the person is engaged in and how they're using that language. I think some of that is just a feature of language more generally, that it disposes us towards making certain sorts of errors. But I also think training in analytic philosophy can amplify that pre-existing vulnerability. It's sort of a, I don't need a metaphor for that, but I think that it's in a certain sense, I think that there's something to this idea that when people use language in certain sorts of ways, it can lead to the sense that it must be picking out something and often it leads to this reification, this sort of not like thinking of your concepts as things in themselves or as things that are part of the world when you're just using words. And I think a lot of analytic philosophers have a sort of weird and unhealthy relationship with language, where language is treated as the sort of metaphysical skeleton key, and that by understanding language, you can understand the nature of the universe itself. And I think that there's a lot of mixing up between language and reality that becomes a sort of natural feature. You swim in it so much when studying analytic philosophy that I think it exacerbates a pre-existing tendency for people to get tripped up over language and makes it even worse. I don't think it's about is specifically, though. I mean, maybe that's a part of it. I don't know. So as far as what exactly the mistake is, I think it's not a single mistake. I think there's a variety of mistakes going on. I think it's quite complicated. I think that there's a lot of causal, historical, linguistic, and cultural factors that are all playing roles here. And it's difficult to, because these are empirical, historical, these aren't questions I could readily answer from the armchair in any easy way. So it'd be a lot of work to try to figure it out. Someone said they subscribed, so I'm checking if I hit 700. I did. Okay. Awesome. Woo! I hit 700 subscribers. Thank you, everybody. And thank you. I think is that page. Yeah. So you are the magic number 700. I did do a screenshot when I hit 666 because that was fun. So if you saw that comment, I did comment on that at the time. Okay, let's see. a question. Do you think that, and this is from Pedro, number 700 question. Do you think that non-naturalist realists develop their ideas about non-reducible moral terms from the common sense view? Just checking. From the common sense view, no, I don't. I mean, I don't think that the common sense view is realist in the first place. I think that this is something that philosophers learn to do. And I think they pick it up from philosophy, not from common sense. Okay, so Jonas Jensen says, so I don't, I, this is making it so, okay, Jonas Olsen. So I'm Danish, so it makes sense to call me whatever you call Jonas Olsen. I think I was calling Jonas Olsen Eric Olsen in one of my videos. I think I was mixing Jonas Olsen up with Eric Sampson for some reason. That was, I still remember that, and it bothers me. That was probably like 3 months ago. Okay, Jonas Olsen, I think. Okay, Moon Sweater says, I literally just now realized that Lance Independent is a pun on Stance Independent. Yep, that's right. That's what it is. All right, so what I was going to talk about today, and I don't know if I shared it in here, I don't think I did, is this idea that I am conceptually impoverished. And I will share with you a link to the blog post for that. Yeah, there it is. Whoop, 1 second. All right, so I have pinned that. So I wrote a blog post on this, and let's get into it a little bit. What does it say here? Right, so when I have expressed that I think that certain terms like external reason, so this is that idea from Parfit that there are reasons for us to do things that aren't reducible to our goal standards or desires or anything like that. Well, let me give a little background before I get into the blog post. So if you ask me like what I think reasons are, I think that's a bad question. It's not a good way to frame the question. I don't think there are reasons. Like, I think that's a weird way to talk, as though like you could find a reason out there somewhere. Now, of course, someone could say that's not being charitable. When we ask whether there are or are not something, we're not saying it has to be a physical object. I understand. But what my concern is, it goes deeper than that. Because I don't think that there are reasons in even an abstract sense. I don't think that they're a thing. I think that the word reason is used in conjunction with other words in ordinary language to serve various practical purposes that emerge in the contexts in which the term is employed. I think that language works in a way that's very holistic, that's very context driven, and that words don't tend to have fixed and rigid meanings, but rather have a sort of flexible, context sensitive use, and that the meaning can be cashed out in turn, like by looking at the context in which it's used and seeing the function of that term alongside the other terms that are being employed. So I don't have an analysis of reasons, because I don't think that there's an analysis to give. I think that the notion that we need to analyze concepts in that way rests on a fundamental misunderstanding about how language itself works. And that to the extent that philosophers demand analyses like this, I think that the demand for an analysis is predicated on conceptual confusions and mistaken views about language and meaning. So that doesn't mean I can't say something about reason talk, because people do use the term reason. So you can imagine a conversation like this. Let's say I went to the store and I bought some food. And someone says, what reason did you have to go to the store? I could say, to buy some food. Now, that you could say to buy some food is the reason, but someone could always ask, well, why did you want to buy some food? How is that a reason? And then I could start explaining, okay, well, I bought food because like I'm a human, I need to eat, I need to maintain homeostasis and maintain a functioning metabolism. I have to eat to be alive, and I want to be alive. Ultimately, my answer would bottom out in my reasons relate in some way to my goals, to my desires, to what things I want to achieve. And so my reason bottoms out in and is reducible to some sort of relation between my goals and what set of actions would be conducive to achieving those goals. And so if I'm, compelled to give an account of reasons, I'm going to cash it out in terms of a type of relation between goals and means of promoting those goals. Now, if you have a goal like eating food, certain actions will be conducive to that, like acquiring food and then eating it, and other actions wouldn't, like sitting down to do Sudoku or something. It's not. I'm not going to get food that way. That doesn't give you calories. So there are going to be some actions that would be conducive to the goal and some actions that don't. And there are facts about which actions are conducive to the goal and which actions are not. And so when I use reason talk, one of the ways I could use it is to describe like why I did an action, or why I want to do an action, or why I shouldn't do an action, or why I think an action is good or bad. All that normative discourse can be cashed out in terms of sort of describing the consistency or the relation between my goals and the actions that are conducive to those goals. You could call them conducivity relations. I've used the term consistency relation, and then someone misconstrued that by saying, okay, well, lots of actions are consistent with the goal, even if they don't promote the goal. So maybe I need a new term. But talk when it references goals and desires. But if someone says I have a reason to do something and it doesn't have anything to do with my goals, I don't know what that could mean. And I like my way of using the language, it sort of gets sort of reduced or discharged. And that use of language, external reasons that are irreducibly normative, cannot be conceptually discharged in that way. In principle, not as like that's not my claim. That's how the people are using these claims. If something is irreducibly normative, it can't be reduced to descriptive claims. But note that the consistency relations I described are a type of descriptive claim. It would be conducive to the goal of not being thirsty to drink water. That's a descriptive claim. It's not a normative claim. And so I reduce all normative claims to descriptive claims. But if you are parfait or you endorse a non-naturalist realist account, then the moral facts are going to be they're not going to be reducible. They're irreducibly normative. And I think irreducible normativity is literally meaningless. I don't think that, I think conceptually it's just total nonsense. Now, when I have expressed this view, I have encountered a variety of reactions to this. One reaction is for people to tell me that I'm lying. I'm just pretending to not understand. I really do know. And for whatever reason, I'm just lying. I've written a few blog posts, and because this has happened often enough that I've had to actually like publicly address people, just straight up saying, you're saying that, I don't believe you. I don't believe you. And I still, in the past month or so, I've had further people just say, I don't believe you. So I think what they're saying is nonsense. And there's no, you don't. I don't believe you. I have very little patience for that. I've spent many years, I went through 2 graduate programs, spent a lot of work on this. And it seemed like nonsense to me then. It seems like nonsense to me now. My view on that hasn't changed. And every time someone says, read another book, read another paper, and I go and do it, it's the same shit every time. There's never been an explanation. It's not like there's a bunch of rich, deep explanations somewhere and I'm not locating them. I mean, there could be. If you think you know of it, send it in the chat, mention it in the chat. Every time someone's told me this and I went, look, it's not there. So, inductively at least, I'm not sold on this concept being substantive of irreducible normativity. So, some people say that, but another thing people will say is that I am conceptually impoverished. Like I just lack the concepts. This is something that Parfit said of many of his colleagues. He'd just say, oh yeah, they just don't get it. They're conceptually impoverished. They just lack the concept. Now, I find that to be profoundly strange, and I'll get into that, but I see some more comments in the chat, so I'm going to have a look at those again. All right. Pedro says, sorry for complimenting this idea late, but from common sense view, I say the idea of pre-scientific ideas of good and evil that is prevalent in moral discourse. Yeah, I don't think that those views are realist or anti-realist. I think that the anti-realism distinction is a technical notion, and they're just not a feature of the way that non-philosophers ever really thought about these sorts of things. Okay. Okay. Sorry, Jamie, if you have other remarks, but I don't know if I want to scroll up and try to read all of them. Perhaps you're sociologically inert by your denial. I don't. If you want to give some context, you could let me know what you mean by that. So Jamie continues to say, then you could start making up all kinds of answers that you think are the right things to say, even though they play no role in action. If you want to develop on that, or maybe I should I go back and read all that? I don't know if there's. It looks like it's spread out over a handful of comments. Let me see. Give me a moment. Okay. I'm not really understanding from that context, but it looks like you have a question after that. So give me 1 second. Oh, yeah, that's not really relevant to this discussion, so I'm not gonna discuss that. I mean, I appreciate the question, but it's just not relevant to this particular discussion. Yona says, if for something to be morally right means for there to be a reason to do it, and for something being moral standing as a reason to carry out that act would be circular. Yeah, and so someone might be able to discharge what appears to be vicious circularity by having more to say. As far as I can tell, they just don't. They just don't have more to say. It's just we get it, and if you don't, you are conceptually impoverished. So if you follow the link to the blog post, you will see that people will actually use the term conceptually impoverished. There are other people that make the similar sorts of claims. So, I don't have an exhaustive list here, but you will get quite a few people saying this. They've also made comparisons to like color blindness. So some people are colorblind, and then okay, maybe some people have problems seeing the relevant sorts of moral facts. Now, I actually think it's a good. If it illustrates how well developed one of these accounts is and how underdeveloped or even non-developed the other is. So in the case of colorblindness, we can show family history. We could show the physiological. I mean, we have a pretty good developed understand. Like we have a pretty well developed understanding of the physiology of color perception, like what parts of like cones and rods in the eye are involved. And a person, I don't know if it's that they don't have the relevant cones or whether they don't function in the way of people with color vision. I don't know if someone has I don't know the explanation, but I know color scientists do. So color perception scientists. So we have a physiological account of like there's particular types of sensory organs. Differences in those sensory organs can cause a person to have color perception or not have color perception. We understand like optic nerves and the occipital lobe and how that whole process. There's physiological processes that mediate the differences between people with color vision and people without color vision, and there's a physiological account of what's going on there. So if someone says, this person's colorblind and this person isn't colorblind, we could do various sorts of tests to show that one person is colorblind and the other isn't. And we have an understanding of the underlying physiological basis for that. So far, so good. Now bring it over to moral blindness, like moral fact blindness. So I studied metaethics. I thought about this stuff a whole lot. I've talked to a whole lot about it, a whole lot of people about it, and I still can't see the objective moral facts. So I have a certain kind of normative blindness, you could say. Okay, what's the physiological account for that? I'll wait. So if someone wants to say that there is damage in my prefrontal moral cortex or something, they're welcome to show the receipts on that. Do the empirical work of actually showing that anti-realists that claim not to have the concepts suffer systematic and similar, like physiologically, like particular locations of the brain, specific lesions in the brain, or some sort of oh, you're missing neurons in this part of your brain, or whatever. Good luck with that. They're not going to be able to show that. So if they claim that they have some special faculty or perception, okay, is it physiologically localized to specific regions of the brain? If so, prove it. If it's not, okay, so how do you know you have this faculty and I don't? Like, what's the account there? Imagine someone says that they have a sensory capacity. Okay, well, can you point to it? And they go, yeah, I have antenna. Look, and you see the antenna. And they're like, I detect moral facts with these antenna. And then, there would be something to that, but it's not like they have antenna and I don't. So like, what is the evidence that they have a faculty I don't have other than them claiming to have it? I mean, it's not any different than someone saying I have telepathic powers and I talk to angels, Now, if the person had like a lobe in their brain and they're picking up signals from space, maybe they do talk to angels, but we would expect them to be able to tell us something more than just armchair speculation. So if someone wants to say, I have brain damage or something because I don't have their philosophical views, like, why is that speculation? Like, prove it. Like, do the work to actually show that. I'd happily serve as a volunteer for an empirical study. I'd help them write the grants to get funding for the study. I'll even throw money in for the grants for the funding for these studies. I'm serious about it. I would actually throw some money in there. Don't have a lot to throw in, but I'll throw something in and I'll support it and pass around the message. Hey, let's do neurophysiological research to find out if anti-realists like me are missing the prefrontal moral cortex. I don't think the realists are going to follow up on that or do that research because, I very much doubt that these claims are all that serious. I think it's dismissiveness when they make these sorts of claims. Or they might just say, "Oh, well, it's not empirical. It's not empirical." Yeah, it's conveniently nothing is ever empirical when it would be helpful if it were. Okay, sure. Okay, I see a few more comments. Yeah, Jonas says people who employ the conceptual impoverishment claim would have to grapple with the fact that the normatively blind are capable of making world judgments, unlike how the colorblind distinguish colors. Yeah, that's true. So, it's not like I can't make moral judgments. I just don't think that the moral judgments are stance independent or irreducibly normative. Like I reject certain sorts of concepts, which again, they can't explain. So they have access to certain concepts that I don't have access to, allegedly. The thing is, why should I grant that they have access to these concepts and I don't? Do they have I want to say, do they have evidence for that? The answer is no, they don't. Not very good evidence, but they might just insist that they don't need evidence for it. But what standards are we using here? Can anybody at any time claim to have any concepts at all, and any implications follow from those concepts? And there's no means of verifying or checking, and we don't have to do anything. What standards are we going for here? I mean, it's a really, so you do have people that make these claims that people in my position are conceptually impoverished. And I think these are really weak claims. I don't see any reason to grant that they have the concepts in the first place. And I don't think they have a good case for it. So, I don't know if there's much more to say than that. Give me one moment. Okay, so I was going to have a guest on here, but they're gonna. I think hopefully they'll drop in tomorrow, and if not tomorrow, maybe we'll find another time. But it should be an interesting discussion to have. I don't want to give away what it's about yet. I think it'll be fun if I make it mysterious. Okay, so I say quite a bit in the blog post itself, where I outlined 10 possibilities. Sometimes I feel like reading through these blog posts. I don't really feel like doing that today. But basically, what I try to do is I try to say, look, if you're going to say I'm conceptually impoverished, I'm willing to take that seriously. If you're willing to sustain and support the claim that I have conceptual impoverishment. And part of that, I think, to show that I lack a concept someone else has, is to show that they have the concept. And what does that look like? So one of the things that you'll see that's common in debate circles, and this happens both within academic philosophy and outside of it, is that when a particular position is popular or well-established or prominent, or when its proponents are assertive enough, they will often engage in the strategy of trying to constantly keep the ball in your court, to always have you on the defensive, to have you defending your views, and to not make a positive account for their views. And I think that this is something that's going on in this case with realists. So they are taking for granted that they are entitled to just claim to have concepts because there's enough of them saying that they have the concepts that we're supposed to grant that. And so then they can say, okay, well, if you don't have the concept, you're the problem. You're conceptually impoverished. We have the concept. I am denying that they have the concept. So I'm not denying that they believe they have the concept, that they're trying to use the concept. I'm not saying anything about the veracity of their claims or their sincerity or anything like that. I grant all of that. But it is possible for people to be confused about their own concepts. And this is something that I'll follow up with what Parfit says after that line. And again, if you want to look it up, it's page 272 of On What Matters, Volume 2. And here's what Parfit goes on to say after that line about Williams questioning the concepts. Okay, so here's what Parfit says. When I claim that Williams and I use different concepts of a reason, I am assuming that each of us at least knows what he himself means. But that might not be true. People sometimes fail to understand not only what other people mean, but even what they themselves mean. I'm going to read that one again too, because again, this is important. Parfit is laying all this out. Parfit totally just says, yeah, can't explain what these terms mean. Hey, Williams thinks they're unintelligible. hey, other people think they're unintelligible too. So one of the things I should flag again is that many people have said, when I've articulated the unintelligibility thesis and said that I think some of these concepts are unintelligible, is they said nobody thinks this way. This is a ridiculous fringe view. Okay, well, Williams thinks it. And this is right in one of the most prominent works of ethics that covers major, components of meta-ethics of the past, 20, 30 years. So it's right in there. This is not, how obscure can it be? That's one person, as if the legitimacy of a position were determined by the number of proponents anyway. We have at least one, and it's not nobody, it's Williams. So anyway, so let me go through that again. When I claim that Williams and I use different concepts of a reason, I am assuming that each of us at least knows what he himself means. But that might not be true. People sometimes fail to understand not only what other people mean, but even what they themselves mean. Parfit goes on. It makes a difference here whether the phrase has a reason for acting has only one ordinary sense of meaning. It makes a difference here whether the phrase has a reason for acting has only one ordinary sense or meaning, and if so, what that sense is. Suppose first that this phrase has only one ordinary sense, which is the internal sense. That would give some support to the view that I misunderstand my own thoughts, since I am wrong to believe that I use the phrase has a reason in an intelligible external sense. When I consider early death, I believe that you have a decisive external reason to take your medicine, though I know that you have no internal reason to act this way. I cannot see how I could be so deeply confused as to believe that it would be both true and false that you have an internal reason to act this way. But I cannot exclude the possibility that, as Williams suggests, my use of the phrase has an external reason does not really state some belief, which might be either true or false, but merely expresses some vague attitude. And this is roughly what I suggest is going on. I suggest Williams is right, and that what Parfit grants as a possibility. Now, granted, Parfit doesn't think this is true, but Parfit grants it as a possibility. Note that. That's important. So Parfit, one of the most prominent, highly respected, revered moral philosophers writing about moral realism, one of the most ardent proponents of moral realism, that the concepts in question may be unintelligible and that Parfit himself could be conceptually confused and not even have genuine beliefs. Now, that creates an asymmetry because, I don't want people telling me what my beliefs are. And so if I say that, technically speaking, from a psychological perspective, if the concept isn't even propositional because it's a pseudo concept, you can't really believe it. I would have to at least go meta on that and say, look, I believe that you believe it. But technically, if it's a pseudo concept, it's not a legitimate candidate for belief. And so on my view, it wouldn't be possible to believe it. But I'm still willing to grant if someone says they believe it, fair enough. I'm not going to say, no, you don't. I would say, I have to be careful about this because I might fall into the habit of saying that because it would be an implication of my views. But I don't think as a feature of a discussion that you're having, that you should reject what a person is saying about their own state of mind or their beliefs or their attitudes or their position in a way that's contingent on your position being correct. So for instance, let's say you're a theistic, agnostic, whatever so is it theistic non-cognitivism? Or you basically think, I think it's agnosticism. I'm going to look it up real quick just to not use improper terminology. I am not Majesty of Reason. I don't know all the philosophy of religion stuff fluidly anymore. Yeah, okay, agnosticism. The idea that the question of the existence of God is meaningless because the word God has no coherent or unambiguous. Yeah, okay. So it was the correct term. Okay, so if you're an agnostic or an igtheist, then you might think that if the concept of God is unintelligible, it's a pseudo concept. You can't really, God exists is technically not a proposition. And so insofar as beliefs are propositional attitudes, it's not actually possible to believe in God. And so if someone says I believe in God, you'd have to say, not technically on my view. So you want to be careful about that because it could come off as very insulting to say, no, you don't, because you're challenging whether the person is being sincere or whether the person knows their own state of mind. And you got to be careful about that. So, that I think it can be kind of rude. So on my view, I think certain sorts of things that people take to be propositions, like there are external reasons, those are not propositions because it's like saying there are florps that florp or whatever, florps that flarp or florps that flurp. I got all the vowel sounds mixed up. Doesn't matter. So yeah, that's roughly what I think. And so what's interesting about this is simply that I don't think that the proponents of these concepts have done the work to show, if there are meaningful but incommunicable concepts, how do you distinguish those from meaningless concepts? How do you know that the concept can't be analyzed further or understood? So if you want to say that the concept is incommunicable, it's unanalyzable, it can't be understood in greater detail. How do you know? So, take medical issues in medicine. There's certain sorts of Alzheimer's or certain types of cancer. Millions or billions of dollars, decades of research, thousands of people working on it, and it hasn't been solved. And so, how long have philosophers been working within contemporary analytic metaethics on the concept of an external reason? Not that long. Less than people have been working on medical issues, with far fewer people with far fewer resources. I mean, the number of respondents to the 2020 Phil Paper survey that specialized in metaethics, I think it was 228, something like that. That's not a lot of people. So it's a very small number of people working with very limited resources for a very short period of time. Maybe they haven't analyzed the concept enough. How do they know it's unanalyzable? So you have a really questionable state of affairs when people are so quick to say that the concepts are unanalyzable. And I just don't think that they've done enough work for us to grant that they have the concepts that they claim to have in ways that are externally capable of external corroboration, whether they have a good account of what concepts are, how concepts are acquired, and whether they have a good empirical basis for showing that they've acquired the concepts through the means by which their account says the concepts are acquired. There's actually a lot of steps that would be necessary to convince me that they have the concepts that they claim to have. And I don't see them working on any of those steps. So I don't grant that they have the concepts. And, it's an interesting scenario to be in, because I think navigating it in a way where you can put pressure on the proponents of these views to give the sorts of accounts that, if someone wants to say, oh, well, how can you say that the concept is meaningless? Well, I could say, what do you mean by concept? What do you mean by this? What do you mean by that? Anybody can make, an arbitrary and excessive number of demands for clarification. I could do it too. I don't think there's a fact of the matter about who has the burden of proof here or whose job it is to explain themselves. Hopefully this is a collaborative exchange and we work together. If a realist genuinely thinks I'm missing something that they have access to, it would be great if they would work with me on that and try to sincerely help me understand what they're talking about. But if the reason I'm not understanding what you're saying by this is because I actually have the better understanding here and you're confused about something, let's work on that. Maybe you're confused about something. What would be necessary to show that you're not confused about this? Let's work on that too. This has got to be a two-way street, I think, if we're going to be fair about this. And what has happened in practice is that a lot of people have been pretty dismissive towards unintelligibility charges. And I really hope that changes. And I really hope that people take this charge more seriously and stop thinking that the ball is entirely in our court and that there isn't any work that it would be reasonable to ask them to do and that they could do to make the case for their own position more robust than it is. Or, what I suspect would happen if you dug deep enough is to recognize, hey, there's nothing there and reject the view. But if not, then the account could only be made stronger by engaging in that inquiry. I messed up. When I've been going at it an hour or two, I start messing up words and I didn't take a break. Inquiry. Okay, let me take a little mental break. I might close out the stream in a minute or two if we don't have more comments or questions. And, it's been a long enough one. I'm starting to not even remember what words mean. Okay, I'm not seeing a lot of other comments. So I'll check a couple things and then we can head out. Yep, that looks like about it. So we're at an hour and a half, and I think it's good for today. It's a good introduction. I might be back here tomorrow. And if so, I don't know when that will happen. So if I have enough advance notice, I'll put up a stream in advance, like you'll see the notification of when it's going to be. If not, I might just start streaming tomorrow. All right, that will do it for today. Thanks everybody for being here. It was less than half the turnout of the last time I was here. So hopefully we could get people back in here. Spread the word, share the video, like the video, subscribe to the channel, leave comments in the comment section. I'd like to get back on the radar. I've gone for a few weeks. I don't want to drop off the YouTube universe and not be recognized anymore. So, help me out if you're able and willing and motivated to do so. share the video around, share my older videos, interviews and discussions that I've had with other people. That would be awesome too. And yeah, let's keep this going and keep having these conversations. And I will see you all later. Thanks so much for being here. Take care.